What's up, gamers, and welcome to another No Rest for the Wicked video. My name is Brian, if you happen to be new around here, and thanks so much for checking out this video. We're going to do a deep dive in all of the latest and greatest information. Where are we going after patch number 3, which officially dropped this past Thursday, and I have not been able to set the game down since. But the devs have been very busy answering our questions over on Discord, but they've also done a full hour-and-a-half interview with Zizaran, and we'll do a couple of clips of his interview in this video, but note that we'll have a full link to his 1 and a half hour long interview that takes place in the middle of his live stream. So just note there's so much to unpack there as well, and if you're looking for more No Rest for the Wicked content, that's something you can totally go check out after this video. But to be rest assured, there is more coming, especially when it comes to the roadmap. And Thomas shares out, yes, the roadmap is coming. He doesn't give an ETA, but I am very, very on point to try and find that information as soon as it drops, because it's going to be very important, very telling. Now, right now, we saw the game kind of shift from a hot fix to then an update like every 2 weeks to now an update on the 2-month marker here since the previous update. I don't think they're going to want to try to go longer than that, and based off of some of the questions, the answers, the multiplayer, and so much more, it does sound like they're actually much closer, and we might see a much tighter time frame, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we dive into the answers and to the questions in this video. So if you all want to stay in the loop on the latest and greatest information around this game and other ARPGs, you're already in the right spot. And if I earn your sub, sound off in the comments below so I can officially welcome you to the channel, just like with Chris and Sprash here. So welcome to the channel, guys, and I also like thanking you guys in the comments as well. Let's start with things that did not make the update. They were delayed, and Thomas writes in response to, can you spoil when those sweet fist weapons are coming? And Thomas says, the delay is on me. They are planned to ship with this update, but I was slow, sad face. We already have the models and the new animations, so now I just got to set them up and test them for fun. Now, the team over at Moon Studios talked about shipping on time versus various different delays and the tension within game development. And one of the key things there is Thomas has actually spoken a pipe, which he's also talked about as an offhanded weapon for this game, maybe to help play out with different mage classes and more. But I'll let them talk about the tension of development real quick.
And I think we have to be vulnerable a little bit, right? Even today, we had this debate in the team of like, oh, there were a few things we still wanted to fix. And, you know, we're perfectionists at heart, and we're like, should we delay the update? Or should we stick to the time, right? And there's always that tension. And today we decided, no, we're shipping on time. You know, this is the date, this is the time. And if something's off, we will just hot patch this and we will react, right? And I think there's that vulnerability that I think as a developer you have to have when you are doing early access, when you are building something with a community.
And I know for me as a player in this regards, this is a very interesting kind of dilemma, because there are things that I still want in this game, and we're going to talk about some of the things that did not make this update, but it does sound like they're very close to having it finished, which does lead me to start speculating that we might see another follow-up update probably within the next month. And as usual, I always like to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm wrong in this case, if we do not see another big update that includes some more content, some more features, maybe even a weapon or two in by the end of August, I'll gift out 5 members here to the community. We have a huge, generous sense of community. We also put out a lot of member-only content here at the channel, so a huge shout out and thank you guys to all of my members who make all of this possible. All right, let's go ahead and start though with what is coming to the game. And Thomas is teasing out that yes, mimics are in fact coming to the game. I'm very excited about that. Classic fantasy trope, treasure chests that want to eat you. And this in my mind starts to play into perhaps the lack of treasure that you find, the lack of loot that you get within the Crucible. Turns out that if you do beat the Echo Knight, there is some loot waiting for you, but it's obviously locked behind that boss. However, if they decide to add in mimics and chests into the Crucible, that could be very interesting. Or if nothing else, mimics out into the open world. One way or the other, I think that's going to be an interesting update. He also confirmed the pet system is planned. We saw with the latest update that they added in the stray system in which that you can pet the dogs and cats that are roaming around the town. It does actually give Sacrament a more lively feel when you see those various different pets walking around. And honestly, having a pet system in the game itself, I'm all for. I hope this means pet classes, in which you can have a class that has a pet that attacks with you, or if nothing else, at a minimum, something to follow you around the town and maybe give you some kind of benefit. Along the lines, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you'd like to see, what system you would prefer over the over the other. So just sound off in the comments. We can have that discussion in future videos. Thomas goes on, when asked about any chance for cosmetic DLCs during early access or any other ways that current players can actually financially support the game. And he says, "We are not going to have try to people murder us if we suddenly introduce microtransactions into Wicked. The best way to actually support us, though, is to tell friends to buy Wicked, and especially tell them once the multiplayer drops." And we're going to see some more updates here on multiplayer in just a second. But I would say, guys, if you're interested, if you haven't picked up the game, I do have a link, and I'll put that in the description for you guys if you want to go check out this game for yourself. It is currently on sale through early August, so be sure to take advantage of that 20% off discount if you haven't already. And if you are, or you do have friends that you're trying to get into this game, if you don't mind sharing that link that I have, would be amazing and great, and a great free way of supporting the content here on the channel. Now, taking a different approach, we have a question here. Is there any chance or way to scale up the overworld so you don't feel like a slug post level 18? And this is from San Furoku. Thomas says, yes, there's going to be another update coming that will increase the levels and introduce new enemies and when this happens, we want to switch to the plague system. This is going to move it to the live and ultimately replace the current system, which is they call the static system. And this update is based off of world events, but a dynamic one that will affect what enemies will spawn in any area over time. This is, I think, a really interesting thing that they're kind of preparing. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially right now how the game is that you kind of have the world scale up. You got different monster factions that kind of live out in the open world, but this is going to be where you go and you clear them out, and then maybe another enemy faction decides to move in when you leave the area. So the world, while is going to be in its design form that we've seen already, it's going to have this kind of living world aspect brought into it. We've seen a little bit of that, the pet system. I think this is going to be more gameplay oriented, and this actually will have an impact on the multiplayer, but we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But when asked how big is the percentage of the map that we're currently observing, Thomas says, we're actually playing on a fairly small portion of what was planned for 1.0. Roughly speaking, it does sound like we will see a significant boost to the open world and the size of the open world and where it goes. But at the time of this recording, we don't have exact figures, and if we do, I'll be sure to share them with you guys. Thomas goes on to say, I'd love to talk more about the feedback on the forum regarding the Crucible. Ultimately, we like to get a crazy player retention out of the Crucible. The first statue there is our roguelike mode. We also want to do things like a boss rush, survivor style modes, and an infinite dungeon, etc. Ultimately, I want people to get a kick out of roguelikes, survivor games, etc., and to get that kick on the side from Wicked as well, and hopefully in a manner that we can take this stuff even further, since it's built on top of our previous systems. For example, in Hades, most levels are fairly flat. There's no verticality to the levels, there's no multiplayer, etc., but obviously there is complexity there still, since in their case that is the whole game. But over time, we think that we'd be able to catch up on complexity there as well. Now, speaking about this infinite dungeon that he referenced, he says, well, it's not so niche. The idea is at the start for the Crucible was to actually start the player off fully naked again. I'd love to do that for the infinite dungeon portion, saying starting from zero, having to pick up items, and after those items having an entire RPG aspect that usually takes roughly 30 to 40 hours condensed into like a 1 hour loop or so. I think it could be super cool and addictive. And that's really where it's going to come down to the fun and the rewards of any system. Those are kind of the two things how I always kind of approach it. Am I having fun? And then what are the rewards? Because if you start seeing that you're going to go get more efficiency out of something else, the gamer mindset, the tendency to optimize the fun out of everything within gaming does exist. So rewards in and of themselves are a very important aspect. That if you pair it with the thing that you also enjoy doing, you end up having a good experience. If you put the rewards that you really need behind activities that you do not like doing, not that you haven't tried those activities, there's a difference in that. You might not know you don't like that, or you might not know you like that activity. But once you've tried it and you made that kind of decision, yeah, if you don't like roguelikes, you know, what is there for you in this game? Well, there's these other aspects of the game itself, but ultimately you feel like maybe a big update didn't really apply to you, and that's a fair critique. One that I don't personally share. I think this was the right call that they made, but it's still, I get it. I understand that it's not going to be an appealing update for every person out there. And one of the most surprising changes about this update is the ring system. For those of you who don't know, the update does not allow you to stack rings anymore. You can only have one type of ring in each of the different slots, and Thomas likes to address this in these comments. He says, I think it's better than we just have more rings that actually accomplish what players want, instead of players having to stack multiple rings that do the same thing. This is going to lead to more diverse builds. I agree with this. I think that's really exciting to see. I've already seen that I've been able to get rings that have better rolls than two of the rings stacking combined already in this update. So I think that also is a very important aspect to it. And so I'm glad to see that kind of change. Now, what's really exciting about rings, as Thomas does confirm, yes, unique rings are coming soon. These are the legendary tier, the gold tier that you want to equate to the various different weapons. Now, regarding armor, though, he says it's a bit more tricky. So they're going to try to figure that out design wise. So all in all, some interesting updates here. For me personally, the fact that we'll be seeing some unique rings, I have lots of hope, lots of excitement to see what that will entail. Now, shifting focus to what we're looking for, we're going to talk about multiplayer now. We're going to talk about the current update, and we're going to talk about a little bit developer hat, Brian, which, if you guys don't know, I'm a software developer working on my own game. And there's some interesting tidbits here. When asked about being astounded that they actually pulled off this update in 2 months because it has so much content, what is Thomas's response? And he says, this was actually all new content, which is pretty stupid to do since we have quite a lot of content that will follow soon where they already did most of the work. But our team thought it was most important thing for the time being to add something that people can spend a ton of hours of fun in, and so that we decided to craft this mode. I'd say compared to the Crucible originally was, this is much closer to what we were hoping it would be, and we're not done yet. So what this tells you is that based off of the feedback, the numbers, player retention, they saw an opportunity and they worked basically their butts off to make new content. And at the same time, they're also working on the other content. There's things that haven't yet been finished. There's things that haven't yet made it into the game, like they talked about with the boss rush mode, the infinite, etc. Those are actually, I think, pretty fairly close according to some hints that Thomas has given in the interviews. And I think that's an important distinction. I know there are people out there who are hungry for more story and zones and level caps. That is on the way. And I think when that does get added, having this update, this Crucible update already kind of in the pocket, is going to allow for more people who then go and play the new stuff, who maybe didn't return for the Crucible update, to go and then check out the Crucible update and have a continued enjoyable experience. So it's pretty strategic in that way, but it's also pretty interesting to see that they, based off of the feedback and numbers, decided to take this change of direction. And so when then does the question of multiplayer come in? And when asked, any leak for multiplayer, Thomas says, folks, we know that everyone wants multiplayer ASAP, and that one of the important distinctions, especially when it comes to multiplayer, for those who are afraid that if they don't add in multiplayer sooner, they're going to have to do massive amounts of rebalancing. They're actually already testing the game with multiplayer. So while we don't have access to it, they are using it. And it's actually really interesting because they go into a full-on detail in the interview with Zizaran about multiplayer and about fighting games and about lag. So let's let them kind of address that now.
And speaking of what's coming, multiplayer is coming next, and I have a lot of questions about multiplayer. How are you guys going to approach things like an economy and trading and even like loot distribution?
Yeah, so we went through that stuff a lot, right? Like we started with loot that was shared, right? But then we ultimately went to first come, first serve, because we really like it when there is discussion happening, right? When it's like not everybody like, hey, I killed this boss and like 4 times the same weapon drops and everybody has it now, right? No, there should in multiplayer, what we want to do to a large degree is this whole thing of like, you know, I really have to communicate with others, right? And it's a tough choice, and it's this whole, you know, it's this whole, hey, who buys a house, for example, right? In multiplayer, like the immediate thing is, who can afford the coolest place, you know, in Sacrament and so on, right? So we went with that, and then economy-wise, we're also doing that thing where it's just we just want to allow for trading, right? Like there's all this. Hey, in ARPGs, a lot of times it gets limited and so on, right? And we just fuck it, you know. Let's just make it all completely free, because there's, you know, if people like that really gives it that whole thing of like items being valuable and so on, right? And just it feeling really good that, you know, you can trade your stuff. So that's the direction that we're heading into.
I think that the important thing for people to know is that, you know, while we haven't shipped this yet, everything we've done over the last 7 years was built for multiplayer, co-op, and PvP from the ground up. Like literally every single thing that is in the game supports that. And our networking model, which we will talk about a lot, it's basically built for fighting games, but it's scaled to a 3D action RPG. So the input response, the lack of rubber banding or lag is going to be something that I think a lot of people will be very surprised by, because this game is networked very differently than any other game in this genre. As Thomas was saying, you know, in Dark Souls or whatever, it's like it almost felt like the multiplayer is a second, you know, sort of second-class citizen. Here, multiplayer is the first-class citizen. Everything is designed and built for it. So, you know, when are we going to ship this? You know, we're working on a big roadmap update, and we're still learning a lot from, you know, what we've done with the launch and how we want to do this. Of course, it's the most requested feature, and it's something that everybody wants to see as soon as possible. But I think for us, it's really important to nail not just a particular update that people really want, but the entire arc of early access that leads us to 1.0. It has to be one story that makes sense, right? So we cannot just focus on specific things. We have to tell a cohesive story, and maybe there are things we still need to do before multiplayer can really work or really work well. Or maybe we will decide to shift multiplayer to earlier and just make sure we can design for that and get the input earlier. So this is the beauty of early access. You know, at some point, we don't quite know. We're still debating. We're still thinking about it. But what we do, we'll do it in the right
Let me say one thing. So regarding multiplayer, what we want to do there is just like from the start, we kind of like set out to do it differently than how a Diablo or Dark Souls have done it. Because usually what you have is, hey, I can host a game, and then some other player joins, and then we play for a little bit together, right? But it's never been really a cohesive thing, right? So our multiplayer works more in the way that you share a realm together, and then you have that feeling of like, hey, oh my God, Sis did these Crucible runs the whole night, and he unlock these things, right? Whereas your buddy actually did another thing, and you see those upgrades in Sacrament, and then you just play, right? So it's almost like a mini MMORPG in that sense, right? You just play, and you see your buddy like, oh my God, he's out there fishing, and you know, like it's just that kind of like believable open world is what we're looking for.
So that will sort of give like a big feeling of like, basically like if I had a Valheim server with a friend of mine and he's progressing the world, well, I'm, oh, that's so cool. I didn't think it was going to be anything like that at all.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. So that you could wake up in the morning, just open up the game, right, and go, oh my God, James did all of that stuff now, and he has a better house than me now. Well, that's not gonna happen, right? And you see that even if he's offline. So that also means that if the host goes offline, right, doesn't matter, right, because the realm is still there, and you just share that together, right? So that feeling of like it's almost like a family, right, where it's like, hey, you just share that thing together and like everybody contributes to it. That's why cool. When you contribute materials to vendors or so on, right, it says contribute instead of, you know, just adding it, because everybody kind of like has to share.
Now, I do see one issue with this that I would love to hear your thoughts on. Like, how is it going to work with, like, at the moment when you're progressing the world and things, it feels like the world scales up a little bit, becomes a little bit more difficult. What happens if I'm playing 4 hours a day, but my friend Steel Mage, he's playing 20 hours a day? Suddenly the world is like really difficult. Am I going to get screwed by that and you have to communicate with your friends? Or are you going to have some sort of like limit on the scaling?
To some degree. So you can screw your buddy over if you extensively play way more than him, right? But I think what will happen ultimately is that people will have their single player realms just like they do right now, and then they'll have another realm where they play multiplayer, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it's almost like a D&D session, right? Where it's like you don't play D&D if two of your buddies are not there or something, right?
True.
You play it together. And generally speaking, we don't want to put kind of like these arbitrary limits and so on people, right? Like, it's just, you know, like, it's just like, hey, if people want to play a certain way, let's allow them to play that way, right? And you said this thing before about like, hey, your wife played Ori and so on, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that we're really interested in, right? That Wicked could ultimately become this kind of game, because you already have housing in Wicked and so on, right? We're also adding a farming update and so on. We always wanted to do this thing where it's like, well, if somebody wants to be just the merchant of the town or the lumberjack of the town or something, right? That you can live out that role-playing fantasy, where somebody else might just go and slash monsters and so on, right? So that's also a really big thing that we want to accomplish, even to the point where it's like, hey, you could buy a house but turn it into a shop by just having these little stalls outside and like, hey, here's the stuff that I'm selling, right? And I'll give it a price, and then everybody else on the realm just sees that price, right? And you essentially turn yourself into a merchant.
I think what stands out to me the most from that is the ability to screw over your buddy based off of your play schedule and time. But the solution is also very interesting, that you can have private realms, you can have single player realms, you can have multiplayer realms. And at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to see. I hope personally that within things like the Crucible and other forms of content, that they don't punish you from especially leveling your character, gearing up your character. I think there's ways that that can be kind of balanced and addressed. Namely, I've covered that in previous videos. Covering it here now is I still think that they could add in another gear pulling system. Something along the lines of every floor in the Crucible, you get a risk reward versus like, should I take the treasure chest now, or should I shoot for the next floor and take the treasure chest then? And then ultimately, if you don't make that floor, then you obviously don't get any treasure. If you do take it, you get to leave with what you got. I think that could be something that could be very helpful, especially for players on a multiplayer realm where somebody has 20 hours and somebody only has 4. At the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I personally cannot wait to go hands-on with multiplayer, and it does sound like it is obviously the next update from their answers. So hopefully that means the next update is going to be in August. Time will tell, and I'll be sure to give you guys those members if I'm completely wrong in that regards. But I have high confidence that that's going to happen, unless for some unforeseen things tend to break. But keep it locked here. I can't wait to share this journey with you guys even more. Now let's talk about gearing up, because about that gear itself, Thomas is saying that it's not actually hard. Play the Crucible a bunch, understand how echoes work, and do all the offerings, and you should get them constantly, obviously clearing out the whole Crucible and the boss. So if you can, there you go. That means I'm gonna have to get to work on my build, because I tell you, I struggle with the Echo Knight. I still struggle even after the update. So, but I am playing a very squishy kind of bowish build, so maybe I need to change that up completely. Anyway, but one thing we've been tracking, and Thomas weighs in on, talking about the Gloam Seeds not dropping, he thinks it might be a pooling optimization. They're checking with the tech team. We've been tracking this whole issue over on the official forums, and honestly, I think the kind of workaround is if you restart your game, that tends to actually solve the problem for the most part. So if you're running into issues where you feel like you're grinding, you're not getting the Gloam Seed, simple game restart will fix it until we get another hotfix, which I do anticipate if they are able to find, identify, and fix this issue, they're going to want to get that patched in as quickly as possible. But also, let's move on to various different events and promotions. Like, one of the things that people do now is Twitch drops. Will they be doing Twitch drops and events in the future? Yes, Thomas confirms that they're going to be doing these live events in the future as it relates to Twitch drops. And if you guys are interested, you don't have to. I do stream everywhere. I do stream over on Twitch, and if you want to catch some drops and you want to do that with me, then all the better. Top link in the description will get you to the Discord, we'll get you to the Twitch, we'll get you to all the places that I make content, and hopefully if you guys are looking for more positivity in your day, maybe check it out. But no worries if not, it's always just a free option out there for you. Now, for those of you who are on PlayStation, my fellow controller brethren, Thomas does confirm that they will push for the PlayStation symbols when using a PlayStation controller as soon as possible. I do think and hope that that is some quality of life that actually makes the next update. I honestly am waiting for it. I play on the Xbox controller, but I know how important it is to mentally not have to do that mapping in your brain every time a prompt happens on screen. All right, let's talk about XP in the Crucible. This is what the devs are talking about. Anelabas Alala Habasi. Man, I am so sorry. I do apologize. Says, why can't I get XP from the Crucible each run? And Carol replies, yes, Thomas, why? And Thomas goes on to say, because I said so. But he also goes on to talk about that in the interview in a lot more detail, and it's really interesting. Let's take a look.
Notice that you took both XP and loot out of the roguelike. Is that something you're going to experiment?
We have a discussion about that in the team still. We'll see.
That's what I was going to ask, because I was like, I do quite like that you were maybe not leveling up, but at least loot, like getting, because now I'm guessing that I wasn't able to kill the boss, but like what happens when you kill the boss? Like what kind of reward do you get?
You still get the loot, right? So you still get all these, tier 3 rewards and so on. So you still get that. But there's a lot of stuff coming. We can't just plan for what is in the game right now, right? We also have to plan already for what is coming now very soon, right? And so this is the first move, basically. Like, we're not anywhere close to done with No Rest for the Wicked, right? There's so much coming, and so everything gets prepared for what's to come.
How much larger do you think the Crucible is going to be?
Well, we still have a few things that actually didn't even make it into this one. So there's probably going to be Crucible Part 2 at some point.
So the cool thing that I love about No Rest for the Wicked in general. Sorry, Gennady, I don't know if did I interrupt you, because we have a bit of lag there.
It's all right.
Okay. So, I mean, the cool thing, the thing that I love about No Rest for the Wicked in general, right, is that it's almost like multiple games in one, right? Mm-hmm. So we could have gone and made a roguelite thing, right? Or we could have gone and just made an ARPG, right? But we can combine those things, and in this one world, right, where you basically give people a forever game, and that's the thing that we ultimately really, really enjoy. With the Crucible, for example, I don't know if we should tease this now, right? But there are other statues. Like right now, you only have this one statue, this one pedestal that you can interact with, but there are others, right? And now you can kind of imagine, okay, there's way more stuff coming than just what you played right now.
Very cool.
Well, also we love to do this with the community. Like this is the whole thing with early access. This is why we wanted to do this, is that you can be extremely quick with just trying things, right? And seeing like, oh, this is cool. Okay, let's do more of that. Let's try this idea. Let's try that idea. And I think the whole snackable, we call it snackable experience with the Crucible, is that you can spend 10 minutes, right, on your break, on your Steam Deck. Hopefully now, performs really well, so you can really enjoy that at 50 to 60 frames per second. And it's just cool. You don't have to be very committed. It's like, oh, I'm gonna do a big run in the overworld or do this or that. You can just have this snackable fun, and every single time you do a run, it's different. Every single time it feels different, it looks different, you have different enemies, the challenge varies, everything just feels unpredictable in the experience you're going to get. And I think there's just something different about that versus the overworld, and different in a way that's addictive, right? You go like, okay, I want to try another one because I'm not sure what I'm going to get.
Yeah.
Why you don't get all of the loot yet or the XP for that, I think that is something we will still be discussing. Thomas is very certain he's not, this breaks all the designs. But I think this is part of early access, is to really explore what we could do and do the right thing by the product, right? It's really not.
I really appreciate the community in general, right? Like the whole thing about early access. And I think that just speaks to the heart of ARPGs, right? Like we look at what all these ARPG fans want, right? And just the whole idea that we can put something out there, even if it's not like final packaged product or something, right? That they play it, they give us a ton of feedback, and we can adjust things and perfect things based on that. With the Ori games, we always had, oh, on this date, it needs to be final and perfect, right? But it's like, but what if we could squeeze 5% more fun out of it, or 10% more fun out of it, right? And I think that's just kind of like in our DNA, that just perfecting games and then having this back and forth with the community is just the best.
Now, while I personally want to see loot brought back in, I want to see XP brought in, I want to see it in a new and different way. If you're leveling, I think it's a perfectly fine option if you want to jump in and get some leveling. But what happens once you're at level cap? And that's where I hope that the devs take the time to build out a value system for XP post level cap. I don't think it should always be about power, especially for XP post level cap, but more for bragging rights. But at the same time, just a way to thank you for getting a level's worth of XP. It always just kind of feels nice when that happens, to see kind of that little fanfare go off and say, hey, and then by the way, here's a couple of rewards for you, with them talking about, and we'll go into farming and crafting and the whole, you know, the whole package together here in a little bit, because they go into more detail over on Discord. We talk, like, there's so many ways that you could kind of reward the player with that, and XP just becomes kind of this behind the scenes, this passive thing that what you're doing in the content is still going to find some way of rewarding you. So if you don't clear the floors, if you don't clear the boss, you don't get that, well, you got a little XP. Maybe you trade that in for a treasure coffer with a level's worth of XP, or you do something like I said earlier, where you have kind of a treasure coffer drop on each floor, and if you choose not to take it, it has a higher chance of better stuff on the next floor. But obviously the risk reward is, if you don't clear the floor, you don't get the chest. I think something along those lines where they can kind of bring those kind of ideas all together is something I'm going to root for, and I love to see XP and those kind of things brought in to the base game, the core overall flow. But you guys can let me know what you think about my ideas, and if you like them, share them. I've posted, I think, on them on the official forums. Let's make sure we kind of communicate that. But if you don't like them, tell me what you hate about it. We can always have those discussions also in future videos. Now, Thomas also goes on to share an update regarding the speed stat. Apparently, the overall speed stat has been fixed. The attack speed was fixed, but the overall speed in and of itself doesn't boost attack speed. So Thomas says, sorry about that. We saw that bug. Tech is actually already working on it, and they don't know how it got snuck in. But that in and of itself is kind of a key aspect of development. Sometimes some changes affect other changes. So that will be coming most likely either in a hot fix or in obviously the next update when that gets implemented. He goes on to talk about enchantments. He calls it Enchantments 2.0. So let's dive into what he has to say. When asked, so I noted in the Crucible, echoes in the Crucible are essentially just affixes. Do you guys have any plans on transferring those into kind of the open world? And Thomas says, I mean, a huge part of why we now look at it at the bit of time with this update was to improve this entire system to allow for whole lot more variety in builds. So yes, we'll see that Enchantments 2.0 at some point, where we tune all of the balance in the current ones and introduce a whole set of new enchantments that'll enable entirely new builds. And that's kind of the idea. Then when asked, will there be any adjustments for a better direction for the focus regeneration, Thomas says, we're always playing around with the numbers. Right now, the one thing that worries me the most is that on damage dealt enchantments cause the stuff leads to OP builds that optimize the fun out of the game. I personally love the on damage dealt as opposed to kill, because that means you can kind of feed yourself with the needed resources. Hopefully that does not mean they're getting rid of them, but one way or the other, I do agree that is on damage dealt is a higher priority than on kill for me. But still, maybe there's some things they can do. So with Enchantment 2.0, it'll be neat to see, right? Where we've seen already with one of the echoes that for kills, every kill you get stacks a damage multiplier. I think that could be something really interesting to see if they wanted to bring in some kind of chain damage. How many enemies can you kill within a set limit, thus keeping your strength buff up? One way or the other, it'll be interesting to see. Anyhow, when talked about, we have to look into the account where people optimize the fun out of it anyway, obviously. Yeah, there's always going to be people who are going to optimize their builds, and honestly, that's okay. So, back to the update itself. Development of the Crucible start before this game was released. Well, they've already kind of shared. It actually took them about 1.5 months of work to get this iteration of the Crucible up and running. Obviously, they are still working on other stuff, so a month or two for a new mode isn't bad, Thomas says, but I think that we could have been more efficient. We also have had to revamp some of the under the hood stuff, so hopefully we'll be able to work much faster in the future now. So this kind of what makes me wonder if we're going to see a tighter turnaround as opposed to 2 months. I would anticipate and expect 2 months. I'm putting my money where my mouth is on a month update here in August, at the end of August. Otherwise, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But 2 months seems probably to be the right amount of time, considering what they were all able to get done for this latest update. But what about those boss rush modes? When will we see this extension to the Crucible Part 2, if you will? Thomas says, it's not too long. We already wanted to ship the boss rush and survivor mode with the update, but had to cut it to ship on time. I think shipping on time was the most important thing. We've all been hungry and waiting this update, but that does mean they could do a follow, and not that it has to be a fast follow, but it means that hopefully that they're within striking distance and we can see more consistent updates, because an update a month ends up being, I think, a really fast pace, but a really fun pace to hit, because if nothing else, every month, check back in with the game. Where are we at? But that also draws in the question, how long can they push off the multiplayer update? If they want to push in boss rush and all those kind of modes into the Crucible, how much more does that push the multiplayer update out even further? And I think that is obviously, as Thomas said, is the most important update, the next update. So we will see. Now let's talk about farming materials. Do you plan to ever address the complaints about timers? Or are you guys happy with them? Thomas goes, I don't agree with the notion of timers are bad, period. I understand a lot of players hate seeing a timer on screen, since that is what a lot of mobile apps and games do. And there is a stigma about this kind of stuff now, since you immediately go, oh great, they're going to introduce pay to win mechanics now. But we have no intention of doing that. We have a lot of general designs planned, and that should make it so that you'll always want to check in on your realm, and that timers are just one component of that. Ultimately, I want to know what timers feel like that you're waiting for Christmas, like a big update is coming and you can't wait until it's there. But the meantime, there's a whole bunch of other stuff to do in the game anyways, etc. I always like that Animal Crossing aspect where not everything is just click the button and it's done. You actually have to sometimes look forward to things. And when pressed on this, personally, I feel that the waiting period already exists if you farm materials that are required. Thomas says, I understand that, and believe you me, we have these exact same discussions internally as well. I'd like to take a stab at all this timer stuff, and also to do things with the time of day so that you will have to be at certain places at certain times, etc. Think time in terms of design. That can be super powerful concept, and it will get you closer to creating a believable world that always feels alive. He goes on to say, yeah, I understand that we think that we have before was crazy loot pinatas in the Crucible, which of course makes players happy, but also kind of defeated the purpose. When the tier 3 zones come online, you'll be able to get tier 3 items in those areas, just like you could with tier 1 and tier 2 items in early zones. Ultimately, he'd like the Crucible to drop exclusive stuff, and then that you don't get anywhere else. And I'm actually all for that. Going back to kind of my critique, it would be interesting. I'd be fine if you could only get certain things from the Crucible. Awesome, sounds great. But yeah, let's make that a little bit more, I don't know, not necessarily forgiving, but let's gamify that just a little bit more, because I think that could end up adding on to the fun. And then finally, on farming, we've got, is there kind of a farming system planned? Stardew Valley, etc.? 100%. Thomas confirms that is 100% coming. But the other thing that's important to mention here is especially about player trading, because no player is going to have the same amount of time to play. Thomas addresses this. It's hard to say because no player plays the same, but at 1.0, at least twice as big as the map we want to see, and it's not including all the extra content like the new cave systems. But here's where it gets interesting. When he thinks about farming, he always is looking at the Animal Crossing for this kind of stuff. He's okay with that being done with one aspect of the game, while knowing that the update tomorrow will have another good reason to play. And that's where player trading comes in. That's where multiplayer comes in. They talked about where if you want to set up your own shop, you can set up your own shop. You can take advantage of these different timers. And though he goes on to ask, do you think so? 15, 1 hour, 4 hours, 8 hours? Is that kind of too much for these timers, especially when it relates to building? Sage does reply and says, oh, I do for sure. I think that if there must be timers, maybe reduce it to the scope of minutes, or maybe make it as in-game time as opposed to my PC clock. For instance, building being able to complete in one game day instead of X hours in real time, when that becomes possible. So what do you guys feel about farming, about timers, about the whole kit and caboodle, and about gear? The lots to unpack there. Personally speaking, as they've talked about multiple times, being early access is a great opportunity for them to throw things against the wall and get it figured out. Now, Sanfor Ku asks, in regards to farming again, this is the point that I wanted to bring up for a while, and since Wicked has a survival twist on it, that I'd love it, but it is also different. In any survival game where I hit a tree or an axe, better axes not only let me break it faster, but trees commonly take 10 plus hits, so even endgame axes still take 2 to 3 hits, but give you 2 to 3 more wood as a result. I'm worried that the pacing of farming in this game can't match that, because you only need two tiers higher than whatever material you're breaking. But if I need to farm copper, whether it is a tier 100 pickaxe or tier 5, it will feel the same. I don't get more ore or break it faster. I don't get any net benefit from the super ultra diamond legendary pickaxe when I need to steady farm up a piece of gear. Thomas replies, well, we did that early on, but players complained the hell and back that the resources took way too long to farm. So at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting. Like I keep saying, it's going to be interesting to see how this game develops, especially as it relates to that, because that is fair critique, especially when you get into higher tiers. Why even go after that diamond pickaxe? Well, there should be a net benefit to you. Now, as that means materials and more, I think that's going to be a function of balance and a function of time. Let's talk about elements for a little bit. Thomas goes on, because this is something when we talked about the rings don't stack anymore. Do elements stack? When asked, does the elemental damage stack, especially when running the Crucible? If you take ice, if you take fire, what's going on there? He says, we actually don't allow elements to stack damages. That's either too powerful or leads to pretty weird stuff, like having a fire weapon that also freezes your enemies. But when it relates to the elements of a similar type, like if you have an affix of 10% electrical damage and then a quartz gem with 15% electrical damage, it happens. Those should stack. And when it comes to elements, are all the other elements going to get a rework like ice did? And Thomas confirms that yes, a rework to the other elements are on the way. Now, as we wrap up this video, we got some more Q&A. Like I said, this is going to be a big video. If you guys made it all the way here to the end, thank you guys so much for being freaking legends. If you feel like the video earns it, hit that like button. It's a great way of helping YouTube know that this is good content for people to check out. Anyway, Smackman says, what in the hell are these damn review bombings again? Do people not understand early access? Thomas says, a lot of it comes from China. Sadly, it's just a different culture. We got review bombed last time because we ran a sale and they felt betrayed, while the Westerners loved it that we gave them a bit of a break financially. And then when asked any chance the Gloam faction will be moved to the overworld as they are Crucible specific, and he says, yes, they will become overworld enemies as well. I think I've actually seen them already in the open world, but maybe that's just my weirdness and craziness and delusion, as I've played way too many hours in the game this weekend. Anyway, Sanfor Ku says, are there going to be have to wait until the next major update before the extra statues for the Crucible, or do you plan on uploading it as a stopgap while we're waiting for the Breach, Farm, and multiplayer updates? Itava says, we'll have to actually assess this on Monday. So at the time of this we're filming, they should be assessing it if they haven't already decided on their plan going forward. I think that's going to have an impact on the roadmap. And once we have the new updated roadmap, I'll be sure to go over that all in detail with you guys here. Anyway, Thomas then goes on to say, I already thought that making Metrovanias was still difficult because the entire world is connected, but you're basically building one huge puzzle. And if you change one puzzle piece, the whole thing might not work anymore. But Wicked is basically that and an RPG stuff on top of it. So we've switched from hard to ultra hard mode in terms of development. And finally wrapping up, well, folks, thank you so much for your support. Sometimes development can be really draining because it's always a roller coaster and we never know how people are going to perceive certain things, or if they can forgive this, or if that thing not working or not being balanced quite yet. But the goal with early access was always to take risks in order to ultimately refine the genre. And that means that we'll have have to break some eggs, 2 to make an omelet. Everybody at Moon is hugely appreciative that of the folks that are on board with this, and they don't grill us for not quite having shipped 1.0 yet. Making an ARPG is unbelievably difficult, but we'll be able to do all the things we love to do, and I think that we'll have a very, very special game in everyone's hands. And so, guys, be sure again to check out the full Zizaran interview that he has. A link again is in the description. A link to purchase the game. I don't actually get any kickback from it, but from a metrics perspective, it does help me. So when you guys check out the links in the description for those support is a great free way of supporting me, even if you don't end up purchasing anything. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to my channel members here supporting the channel. Had a massive weekend of gifted members. And so if you guys do have the ability, no pressure not to, but membership starts at $3. I like to try and keep it at the very, very affordable tier for everybody. And what that does is that as people gift out members, it takes you out of the pool, so that way it would then be able to go to somebody who might want to check out the exclusive content and have those perks for at least a little while. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for sticking with this epic video. Say also a special thank you to Jack in the comments for putting this one together. This was a big video, but I'm really excited and hope that you guys got a lot out of it. Can't wait to share more No Rest with the Wicked with you guys and be keeping it locked here to the channel for more of that and ARPG nonsense. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for spending time with me. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. But until then, take care.